I never thought that a tutoring arrangement could change my life so drastically. It all began during my final year of high school when my grades started slipping. My parents, concerned about my future, hired a tutor to help me catch up. That's when and entered my life, and was unlike anyone I had ever met. In her early 30s, she carried herself with a quiet confidence and grace that immediately drew me in. She was beautiful in a way that wasn't just about her looks. There was something captivating about her presence, the way she spoke, the way she moved. Her long, dark hair framed her face perfectly, and her eyes, a deep shade of brown, sparkled with intelligence and warmth. From the moment she walked into our house for the first time, I knew there was something special about her. She was kind, patient, and had an uncanny ability to explain even the most complex subjects in a way that made them seem simple. But it wasn't just her teaching that fascinated me, it was everything about her. At first, our sessions were strictly professional. We would sit in the living room, surrounded by textbooks and notes, and she would guide me through the material I was struggling with. I was a good student, eager to learn, and she was a dedicated tutor, determined to help me succeed. But as the weeks went by, something began to shift. I found myself looking forward to our sessions with an intensity that went beyond academic ambition. I started noticing the little things about her. The way she would tuck a strand of hair behind her ear when she was deep in thought, the way her lips curved into a soft smile when she was pleased with my progress, the subtle scent of her perfume that lingered in the room long after she had left. I began to linger after our sessions, finding excuses to keep her there just a little bit longer. We started talking about things beyond school, our favorite movies, books, the places we wanted to visit. I learned that she was passionate about literature, that she loved hiking in the mountains, and that she had a wicked sense of humor that made me laugh more than I had in a long time. It wasn't long before my feelings for her began to grow into something more. It wasn't just a crush, it was deeper, more intense. I was falling in love with her, and I didn't know how to stop it. I knew it was wrong, that she was my tutor and that I was her student, but I couldn't help the way I felt. I tried to push those feelings aside, telling myself that it was just a phase, that I was just infatuated with her because she was older and more experienced. But the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger my feelings became. I found myself daydreaming about her, replaying our conversations in my mind, wondering what it would be like to be with her in a way that was more than just a student and tutor. One evening, after a particularly challenging lesson, Anne suggested that we take a break. "You've been working hard," she said, smiling at me in that way that made my heart race. "How about we play a game to clear our minds?" I agreed, eager to spend more time with her outside the confines of our usual academic routine. We decided on a word game, something simple and lighthearted. We sat on the floor, the coffee table between us covered in books and papers, laughing as we tried to outwit each other. As the game went on, the atmosphere between us began to shift. The teasing banter turned into something more charged, the laughter giving way to lingering glances and subtle touches. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could see that she was feeling it too, the same tension, the same unspoken desire that had been building between us for weeks. At some point during the game, I reached out to grab a piece from the board, and our hands brushed against each other. It was such a small thing, but the electricity that shot through me was undeniable. I looked up at her, and for a moment, our eyes locked, and the world around us seemed to fade away. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but before I could stop myself, I leaned in, closing the distance between us. My lips brushed against hers, soft, tentative, like a question waiting to be answered. For a split second, I froze, realizing what I had just done, expecting her to pull away, to tell me that it was a mistake. But she didn't. Instead, she kissed me back. The kiss was gentle at first, a hesitant exploration of something we both knew was wrong but couldn't resist. But as the seconds passed, it deepened, becoming more urgent, more desperate, as if we were trying to make up for all the time we had spent denying what we felt for each other. My heart was racing, my mind spinning, but all I could think about was how right it felt to be kissing her, how much I had wanted this, even if I hadn't fully realized it until that moment. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her closer, losing myself in the taste and feel of her. When we finally pulled away, both of us were breathless, our faces flushed with a mixture of desire and fear. We stared at each other, the weight of what we had just done hanging heavy in the air between us. And I began, my voice barely above a whisper, but she silenced me with another kiss, more passionate than the last, as if she was trying to shut out the reality of our situation. From that night on, everything changed. Our tutoring sessions became an excuse to be alone together, to steal moments where we could touch, kiss, and forget about everything else. I was completely consumed by my feelings for her, by the thrill of being with her in a way that I had never experienced before. But as much as I wanted to be with her, there was a part of me that knew it couldn't last. We were living in a fantasy, ignoring the consequences of what we were doing. I knew nothing about her personal life beyond what she had shared with me, and I had never even thought to ask if she was involved with someone else. I was too wrapped up in my own feelings to consider the possibility that she might be unavailable. The evening began with a sense of excitement and anticipation that I hadn't felt before, and had invited me to her house for the first time, and the prospect of being in her personal space, away from the prying eyes of the outside world, filled me with a thrill that I couldn't shake. I arrived just as the sun was setting, the sky a deep, moody gray that mirrored the unease in the pit of my stomach. I tried to tell myself that it was just nerves, but deep down, I knew there was more to it. Anne's house was modest but charming, nestled in a quiet neighborhood lined with trees that were beginning to shed their leaves for autumn. The front yard was well kept, with a small garden of colorful flowers that added a touch of warmth to the cool evening. I stood on the front porch for a moment, trying to steady my racing heart before I knocked on the door. When Anne opened the door, I was struck by how different she seemed. She wasn't the composed, professional tutor who came to my house 3 times a week. Here, in her own home, she was softer, more relaxed, and there was a vulnerability in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. She was wearing a simple dress, the kind that clung to her figure in all the right places, and her hair was loose, cascading over her shoulders in soft waves. "Come in," she said, smiling as she stepped aside to let me in. As I crossed the threshold, I felt like I was entering a different world, one that was more intimate, more personal. The interior of her house was cozy, with warm lighting and soft furnishings that made it feel inviting. The walls were adorned with framed photographs, and as I glanced around, I noticed a few that must have been taken on trips or during special moments in her life. It struck me that I knew so little about her personal life, and for a brief moment, I wondered why that was. We moved to the living room, where Anne had laid out a bottle of wine and 2 glasses on the coffee table. The room was dimly lit, with a few candles flickering softly, casting a warm glow over the space. It was clear that she had gone to some effort to create a romantic atmosphere, and the thought sent a thrill through me, even as a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that something wasn't right. We sat on the couch, close enough that our knees touched, and she poured us each a glass of wine. The conversation flowed easily at first, as it always did with her. We talked about books, about life, about the future, everything except the growing tension between us, the unspoken feelings that had been building for weeks. As we sipped our wine, I couldn't help but admire how beautiful she looked in the soft light, her features relaxed and open. There was a moment when she turned to look at me, and our eyes met in a way that made my heart skip a beat. The air between us was charged with something unspoken, something that neither of us dared to voice but both of us felt. "Thank you for coming," she said softly, her eyes holding mine. "I've been wanting to invite you over for a while." "I'm glad you did," I replied, my voice low, almost a whisper. "It's nice to see you outside of our usual setting." She smiled, a small, wistful smile that made me feel like there was something more she wanted to say. But before I could ask, she leaned in, her lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was soft, tentative, and full of unspoken promises. I kissed her back, my heart pounding in my chest as I lost myself in the moment. The taste of wine lingered on her lips, sweet and intoxicating, and I felt a rush of emotions that made my head spin. We had kissed before, stolen moments during our tutoring sessions that had been both thrilling and terrifying, but this was different. This was deliberate, intimate, and filled with a longing that I hadn't realized was there until now. As the kiss deepened, I felt her hands in my hair, pulling me closer, her breath hot against my skin. I wrapped my arms around her, drawing her into my lap as our kisses grew more passionate, more urgent. It was as if we were trying to drown out the reality of our situation with the intensity of our desire, losing ourselves in the physical connection that had been building between us for so long. But then, just as I was about to suggest moving things to a more private setting, I heard it, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway, and froze in my arms, her entire body tensing as if she had been caught doing something forbidden. Her eyes widened in panic, and she pulled away from me, her face pale. "What's wrong?" I asked, confusion and fear knotting in my stomach. "He's home," she whispered, her voice trembling. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with a meaning that I didn't want to understand. "Who's home?" I asked, my voice shaking as I tried to make sense of the situation. "My husband," she replied, her words hitting me like a punch to the gut. Husband. The word echoed in my mind, making my stomach churn with a sickening realization. All this time, I had been blind to the truth, so consumed by my feelings for her that I hadn't seen the signs. The ring on her finger that she always seemed to hide, the way she never talked about her personal life in detail, it all came crashing down on me in that moment. I pulled away from her, my heart pounding with a mixture of shock and betrayal. "You're married?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, as if saying the words out loud would make them real. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said, her voice breaking. "But I couldn't stop what we had. I couldn't stay away from you." The room seemed to spin around me as the weight of her confession sank in. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me, leaving me in freefall. I had been involved with a married woman, had been part of something so wrong, so forbidden, and I hadn't even known it. "We have to end this," I said, my voice hollow as the reality of the situation crashed over me. We can't do this anymore." But before I could say anything more, the sound of the front door opening filled the house. Anne's eyes widened in panic, and she grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the back of the house. "You have to go," she said urgently, her voice trembling with fear. "Please go out the back. He can't see you here." I stumbled after her, my mind racing, my heart pounding as I tried to process what was happening. She led me through the kitchen, her hand gripping mine tightly as if she was afraid to let go. We reached the back door, and she pushed it open, the cool night air rushing in and chilling me to the bone. "Go," she whispered, her voice breaking as tears streamed down her face. "Please just go." I stepped outside, my mind still reeling, and turned to look at her one last time. Her face was etched with pain, her eyes pleading with me to understand, to forgive her. But I couldn't. Not now. Not after everything that had just happened. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, and turned away, slipping into the shadows of the backyard. I hid behind a tree, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts as I watched through the window. I saw him then, her husband. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with an air of authority that made my blood run cold. He walked into the living room, his face tired but affectionate as he greeted, and she kissed him on the cheek, her smile forced, her body stiff with tension. I could see the fear in her eyes, the way she glanced toward the back door, as if expecting him to discover the truth at any moment. I felt like I was going to be sick. The reality of what I had been a part of, what I had almost done, crashed down on me like a wave, threatening to drown me. I had been so blinded by my feelings for her that I hadn't seen the truth, hadn't realized the consequences of what we were doing. I didn't know how long I stood there, hidden in the shadows, watching them as they moved through their home like any other married couple. But eventually, I forced myself to turn away, to leave before I could do any more damage. As I walked away from her house, my heart heavy with guilt and shame, I knew that things would never be the same again. The fantasy that I had been living in was shattered, replaced by the harsh reality of what we had done. I had to end it. I had to let her go, even if it meant breaking my own heart in the process. But as much as I tried to convince myself that it was the right thing to do, that it was the only thing to do, I knew that I would never be able to forget her, never be able to forget the love that had consumed me, even if it was forbidden.